Hey gang, Chris Davis here, video and feature producer here at 4Player. Once again, Cyberpunk 2077 has been delayed, and with the launch of the next-gen consoles this week, you might be a tad upset, especially if you took November 17th off. Not to worry though, we've got you covered. Here are some of our picks for Cyberpunk-style games that ought to keep you going in the meantime.
Cyberpunk is an interesting genre in that it can mean any number of things. Perhaps most commonly, it leans into the portrayal of, like a neon-painted dystopian future where the line between man and machine is blurred. It tends to emphasize the disparity between social classes by contrasting poverty and futuristic scientific advancement. On a general level, it frequently leans towards science fiction. But my favorite spins on the genre actually come when it starts to walk the line between science fiction and horror, a subgenre that is admittedly pretty hard to come by. But Observer is one such example. The game was developed by Bloober, a studio that has become known for cranking out smaller, unique horror experiences like Layers of Fear, last year's Blair Witch, which I loved, and The Medium, which, like Cyberpunk 2077, is also coming out next month. But Observer is perhaps their most interesting project from a subject matter standpoint. You play a detective in the year 2084 who uses something called neural interrogation to hack into people's minds to find clues while on the trail of a serial killer. It's very Blade Runner in its concept and atmosphere, but when you delve into people's minds, it gets weird and unsettling. And this is where the horror influences start to take hold. But why would I recommend this ahead of something like Cyberpunk 2077, which admittedly doesn't seem to concern itself much with the overt horror influences? It seems like a much brighter game with an emphasis on action. Like Cyberpunk 2077, though, a lot of the atmosphere and appeal of Observer is rooted in those cyberpunk influences. Perhaps most notably, Blade Runner. Hell, it even stars the late Rutger Hauer. The game is dark, environments are dirty, everything is wet for some weird reason, drug use is rampant, but they seem to differ in how they leverage those influences, and while I hope I'm wrong about this, Observer seems destined to be the game that really leans into the investigation mechanics, maybe more than Cyberpunk 2077. While everything I've seen of 2077 looks promising, it almost certainly seems like it's aiming to deliver a more action-oriented experience, set in a similar world. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but there is so much potential in this genre for inspired mechanics and storytelling opportunities beyond just shooting things with fancy guns. As time passes, I think Blade Runner 2049 has kind of become one of my favorite films. It's a meticulously paced, smart, and intentionally beautiful film, and one that I hope serves as kind of a major influence for Cyberpunk 2077. Only time will tell, but Observer is a game that is already out in the wild, that has proven itself as an inspired foray into the genre, that seems to capture some of the same magic as that movie. I think it can serve as an entry point for the genre if you're unacquainted with it, or in some ways it can even set the stage for the release of Cyberpunk 2077 as it approaches. My hope is that Cyberpunk 2077 feels like the best of both worlds, but just in case, maybe Observer can complement that game rather nicely.
Back in 2015, I sort of fell in love with two Cyberpunk hidden gems, and I thought they would be perfect for this episode because, one, I think more people need to play these, and two, they're actually kind of similar. Even though they're very different in some key ways, they're also kind of similar. They're both about, little heists, taking your dudes into like these corporations, these facilities, and stealing weapons and research and making your guys more powerful and yeah, it's great. It's great. The first one is Satellite Reign, and this one, it's a little different because you kind of have this open world city and you're leveling up your four dudes with augments and weapons and research, and you get all that stuff by breaking into these facilities. Did I mention this is a spiritual successor to the Syndicate series? Like the old one, not the one that Carlos might talk about all the time, the first person shooter or whatever reboot from the 360 generation, but I'm talking about the old RTS tactics games. This is one of those, and while I never played those old games much, I played the hell out of Satellite Rain, and it felt real good sneaking into like these bases, these heavily guarded bases, setting up well-planned heists where my sniper's up high. By the way, this game has a lot of really cool verticality for this isometric style RTS game. I love there's zip lines, man. Your guys can fall off zip lines and everything can go horribly wrong. I feel like a lot of my time in Satellite Rain was spent, setting up and then everything falling apart, and then just trying to make the most of the situation. And usually that ended very badly until you started hacking ATMs and kidnapping researchers and getting richer and more powerful, and all of a sudden, your augmented dudes started becoming real powerful, and you were able to go in guns a-blazing, and it's just really cool sense of progression and economy. You start off hacking ATMs, but eventually you're robbing banks, and it just that growth felt really, really cool. It's just a really cool feeling in a game like this. And I apologize for this footage. It has been 5 years since I played this game, and I'm just sort of clicking on things and shooting them. This is an in-game save, and I'm just way more powerful than the people in this area that I'm in. But I promise, when you play this game, it's a bit of a stealth game. You're doing a lot of sneaking around and using a lot of cool abilities and drones and silence grenades. There's silence grenades that create bubbles of silence that you can create explosions in and no one can hear. It's so cool. There's so much cool little tech and weapons and stuff in Satellite Rain. And look at the neon and the signs. And it's a good one, man. Let me tell you, it's a good one. And if Satellite Rain is kind of what your dudes are doing out in the streets, out in the city, getting in, finding a way in to break into these facilities, Invisible Inc. is kind of the other side. Once you get into the building, how do you move around that building to get what you need, to get that research, to get the weapons and stuff. And that's what Invisible Inc's all about, except it's a turn-based tactics game. And this is developed by Clay Interactive. You might know them as the guys who made Mark of the Ninja and some other games. And I say Mark of the Ninja because honestly, this feels like kind of a slowed down tactics version of Mark of the Ninja, where you have a lot of tools and gadgets, and this is the stuff you're getting, like you're stealing as you play, these augments, these weapons, these tools, and like Mark of the Ninja, this feels really well tuned. Like you always have an approach, you always have an out when things look bad. This is a really well made turn-based stealth game, and like Satellite Rain, getting out of a bad situation is the most fun you can have. And the game is so good, again, like Mark of the Ninja, providing you with all of the information you need to make a smart decision. And let me tell you, you can get into some really, really tense situations. But this is such a challenging and rewarding tactical stealth game, and this is a roguelike, and it is a run-based game, but your run's going to take quite some time, and the next time you play is going to be completely different. You're going to have unlocked new characters, and it's just, man, it's so good. This is such a well-made game. Satellite Rain, I have a harder time recommending to everyone because, if you're not really good at RTSs, or if you don't like games that are rough around the edges, maybe it's a harder sell. But this is such a smart, polished, well-made game. I think it's the best game Clay has made, and if you missed it, you gotta trust me. This one is a fucking gem. Play it.
A lot of people didn't like Syndicate when it came out in 2012. Probably because there had been some pretty negative opinions about it pre-release regarding the franchise being rebooted as a first-person shooter rather than a tactical strategy game. But it was made by Starbreeze, who had put out some pretty good shooters before, such as The Darkness and The Chronicles of Riddick. And Syndicate, it's a solid shooter. It's short. It's got a pretty good cyberpunk aesthetic, even if the bloom lightning seems to be excessive at times. It's another thing that people criticized about it. And it's pretty representative of the time period it released in, with its heavy use of dubstep music. A lot of you will remember the first trailer for the game had a Skrillex song playing. And I'm gonna be honest, aside from the pretty solid, very weighty physical gameplay, story's pretty bad. I didn't understand it back when I played it, and just now I looked up the plot synopsis on Wikipedia to try and remember what the game was about, and it's bad. It's really bad. But who plays video games for the story, right? Co-op was pretty good too. Don't play Cyberpunk 2077. Pirate that shit.
I'm a particularly big Deus Ex fan, but if you would have asked me after Invisible War whether the franchise had a chance of coming back for a third title, I would have shaken my head emphatically no. Warren Spector had moved on from Ion Storm to found Junction Point and make the first Epic Mickey, and Harvey Smith had landed at Arcane Studios and was formulating what would eventually become Dishonored. But, lo and behold, in November of 2007, the freshly formed Eidos Montreal teased a third Deus Ex title, which was one hell of a thing to do. After all, Invisible War 4 years previous had ended on a rather dire note, leaving very little room to explore a post-2072 world. I mean, how could you make a sequel to that? Well, it appears that Eidos Montreal agreed, and instead decided to explore the events leading up to the original game, entitling it Deus Ex Human Revolution. The 2011 title's dive into the yesteryear of 2027 was an exceptional one, allowing you to explore a technological renaissance as innovation experiences exponential growth and society is struggling to catch up. I love Human Revolution, but for the purposes of getting psyched up to play Cyberpunk 2077, it's not what I really want to talk about. Rather, it's the sequel, Mankind Divided. Set 2 years after Human Revolution and following up on the AUG incident in which 50 million people died, the Augmented are now cast as lepers of society, banished into ghettos and largely deprived of human rights. In the middle of this crisis returns Adam Jensen, the man who saved the world at Panchaea, now a member of Interpol's Task Force 29, and tasked with responding to AUG terrorist attacks that are spreading throughout Europe. The game largely takes place in the Czech Republic, where the repercussions of the AUG incident can be seen everywhere you look. Brutal police crackdowns on the Augmented and open segregation that separates friends and loved ones just because they're not 100% flesh. It's a nightmarish vision to imagine, but one that's also exceptionally intriguing to explore. You might think that the choice of Mankind Divided, let alone any Deus Ex game, is a bit too on the nose, and you'd be right. They're both first-person RPGs with body manipulation at the core of both its main character and the primary focus of the plot. That being said, I think what would be the most intriguing aspect of playing Mankind Divided will be the opposing nature of the games. V's lawless mercenary for hire focus versus Jensen's law enforcement focused detective narrative. A society that has embraced augmentation versus a world where it may soon be outlawed. Even the differences in the main characters themselves will serve as a positive, enticing contrast to experience. Jensen's no-nonsense, remorseful yet vengeful story, I think, makes V's greed-driven, unambiguously ambitious search for the implant that will grant them eternal life even more exciting. If you haven't checked out the franchise before, I certainly recommend giving Human Revolution a shot. But if you want something that goes a little deeper into the themes of augmentation and transhumanism, Mankind Divided is the one you should really take a look at.
Well, with Cyberpunk 2077 delayed yet again, we all have a bit longer to wait to get our hands on it. In the meantime, we hope some of you are inspired to give some of these games a try. They may not be the same, truth be told, they are all quite different in fact, but they share a similar world and vibe. Let us know what we missed in the comments. In the meantime, we'll get started on our next video. If you want to help shape these video features in the future and even contribute your own ideas and choices, please visit us at patreon.com/4player. Until next time, cheers.